months back, I posted a video demonstrating the chords to Sweet Georgia Brown on the mandolin in the key of F. I thought it might be interesting to do the same thing on the guitar. It's because this song is really in all kinds of styles of music. People love to improvise on it. And I think that's because it has this great chord progression that if you're in the key of F, the first chord is a D7. And the next one is a G7. The next chord is a C7, and then it returns to F. And this can be described as a cycle of fifths progression. And the interesting thing about it is when I play D7, which we'll get into a little bit more specifically in a minute, it's a dominant chord and it's a 5 chord. So the 5 dominant is pulling you to the 1. So if you think of D7 as a 5 of something, it's the 5 of G. And of course the next chord is actually a G7. So that's another dominant chord. It doesn't resolve to G, but now you think of this G7 as a 5 to something else. What is it a 5 of? It's a 5 of C. That happens to be the next chord, but another dominant, C7. That's going to be a 5 chord, not a 1 chord, that leads to F, because C7 is the 5 of F. Now we get to F, it's not a dominant, and it rests on F. So you have this continual tension in the chord, almost resolution, but then more tension, almost resolution, more tension. It's pretty interesting. The second part of it goes to minor, D minor, and then the 5 of that D minor, A7, D minor, A7, and then it goes back to F. And keep in mind D minor is the relative minor of F, so it kind of all fits together. That usually plays an F or an F6, E7 dominant, E flat 7 dominant, D7 dominant, and then G7, C7, F. So let's look at those chords, starting with the D7. This D7, I'm going to do it on the inside 4 strings. I'm not going to use the first string. I'm going to dampen that, and I'm not going to use the 6th string. I dampen the first string with the other side of my first finger. And I dampen the 6th string with the kind of the fat part of the, I have fat fingers, of my 3rd finger. I'm doing kind of a comp here. I always call it a cha, 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 cha. And the cool thing about this is I'm stopping the sound by just lifting the fingers of my left hand that are holding the chord. Again, we're in the key of F, and relative to F, D7 kind of doesn't exist. Because I can't make D7, can't make this chord in the key of F. I have to borrow something from somewhere else. So that's why we can think of this as a 5 of something. Maybe I borrowed the F sharp that needs from the key of G. Let's try playing along kind of slow with the cha-chuck rhythm. And here we go with D7. 1, 2, ready, play. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3. So this is 4 measures of this, then G7, new chord, also 4 whole measures of it, and then C7, 4 whole measures, back to F for 3 measures, and then we do another quick A7. Let's talk about those chords individually again. This particular chord here, this looks like a C7 moved up 2 frets, and makes sense. C7 plus 2 half steps is D7, C7, D7. The G7 is probably, if you haven't played much of this music, it's a new chord to you. And here you can see I'm making it at the 3rd fret. After that, I go to C7, which the opposite thinking that I just mentioned is that it looks like that D7, but moved down 2 frets. I'm not going to use the first string. I'm going to dampen that, and I'm not going to use the 6th string on this particular chord. On the G7, I didn't use the 5th string or the 1st string, but I've got that down there. C7, and then you have to make just a regular old barred F, which you can do with your thumb. Now, let's go back to that D7 again. This is the root. This is also the root. So wherever you place it on the fingerboard, you have a dominant chord, dominant 7. And again, that's pulling towards a 1. You think of all these dominant chords as 5s of something. So the cool thing here is if I've got this 1 position, same thing as the C7, C sharp 7, D7, E flat 7, E, F7, F sharp 7, and so on. That is amazing bang for your buck. You learn 1 position, and since it doesn't have any open strings, you can move it to maybe 9 or 10, depending on how your fingerboard is structured. In other words, if you have a cutaway, you can probably make more chords. The G7 works the same way. This is the root on the 6th string. G7, F7, F sharp 7, G7, G sharp 7, A7, and so on. Again, really phenomenal that you can do all these different chords with that 1 position. That A7 looks just like your G7. Now the D minor, I'm just doing a different kind of chord, really. It's on the inner 4 strings. Again, I'm not using the 1st string. I'm not using my 6th string. And you'll notice that it kind of looks like an A minor. If I could make an A minor without using my 1st finger, move it up to the 5th fret, closed position chord, so you get a lot of mileage out of it. I can reach from a B flat minor, maybe all the way up to an A minor. So that's every minor chord I could need. Okay, so we go back and forth between tries D minor to A7, D minor, and A7. Then some people just play an F chord. Some people play an F7 chord. I play an F6. And the way I'm going to do that is I make like an A minor with my 1st finger at the 6th fret. And then I put this down, my pinky is on the 5th string. I'm not using my 1st string or my 6th string. Another closed position chord, so I can play anywhere I can reach. Here it would be an E6, E flat 6, D6, D flat or C sharp 6, C6. So these are really useful chords. Okay, so you got F6, we got that same old chord, that same old position of the dominant, E7, E flat 7, D7, G7. That's our other form we have. C7, back home to F. And when we finally get to that F, it really does feel like home. It has resolved from the tension of those dominant chords. Let's try the whole chord progression together. And we'll do it at kind of a moderate speed. 1, 2, ready, play. D7. G7. Four whole measures again. Now C7. Four, 2, 3, 4, up to your F. 3 measures here, 3, 1 measure of the A7. D7. Think of this as a 5 chord. Pull it somewhere. Here's a G7. This is also dominant, pulling somewhere. Now the big surprise, D minor. 1, 2, 3, 4, A7. 3, 4, D minor, A7, F6, E7, E flat 7, D7, G7, C7, and we're back home. If you play with a band that plays it in the key of G, you just move up everything up 2 frets. So my first chord then would be E7. Except for the key, it sounds exactly the same. And I'm going to turn it on B7, E7 again, and A7. Now we're going to go up to E minor, B7, E minor, B7, G6. I can't say it quick enough, but those same chords, and that was G6, F sharp 7, F7, E7, A7, B7, and back home to G. So we've done it in 2 keys. You might get it in another key. You might get it in A flat. So we talked about this as being a cycle of fifths. A lot of people might call this, let's go back to the key of F. People might call this, say that, well, that D7 is a 6 chord. And people say that's what it is. That's how I've talked about it for years. But it's not technically true, because the 6th chord in the key of F is supposed to be a D minor. And we don't have the proper F sharp in the key of F to make this D7. But some people might call this progression, instead of a cycle of fifths, 6, because D relative to F is a 6th. The D7 is not really a 6th. And then G7, people could call it a 2, even though we can't make a G7 in the key of F. And the C7, they might call that a 5, and it is truly a 5. It's a dominant chord in F. So it's just different ways of speaking about these things. And so you probably would pretty accurately describe the first part of the progression to Sweet Georgia Brown as a cycle of fifths. And then, of course, it goes to the relative minor, and it goes to the 5 of the relative minor. A7, you might think of it relative to F as a 3 chord. People call it that. Not quite exactly accurate. So those are the chords to Sweet Georgia Brown, and I hope you'll enjoy playing them. I sure have had a ton of fun over the years learning this progression. And when it finally sunk in what it was, how the progression moved, it was just like a light bulb lighting up above my head. I played this with jazz bands, I played this with country bands, I played this with bluegrass bands. And you'll find that there are literally hundreds of thousands of other tunes that use this basic cycle of fifths pattern as either part of the progression or all of the progression. You can learn more about these chords in my book on Gypsy Swing, called Gypsy Swing and Hot Club Rhythm. It's got a lot of these chords mapped out in diagrams for you and placed in the context of a bunch of tunes to play along with, and just practice, 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 practice. Gypsy Swing and Hot Club Rhythm Complete Edition. There's also a really good Mel Bay book. I think it was Mel Bay's first book, Rhythm Guitar Chord System Now. That's really good. Another play-along book that I have is called Backup Tracks, Swing and Jazz, which has a lot of these types of chord progressions, a lot of, again, what we call cycle of fifths things. So I hope you'll check them out.